the evolution is that in the first part of the book, which corresponds to the, these are articles that I wrote in the 1970s until the early 1980s. These are articles that I wrote in the context of the feminist movement and my activism in the International Wages for Housework campaign. And in that context, reproduction refers primarily to domestic work, to all the unpaid work the women do, again, on a day-to-day basis. In the second part of the book, reproduction takes a broader meaning, and reproduction actually extends to, for instance, farming. In the mid-80s, I spent some time in Nigeria where, in a sense, the question, I came into contact, with a new problematic, a new feminist problematic, not only feminist, is the question of the land struggles, subsistence farming, the fact that women in many parts of the world, Africa first of all, are 80% of the subsistence farmers, producing for the consumption of their families. And this kind of activity, was coming under great attack by the World Bank, who were now in this move to privatize land and to put an end to any activity that escaped the market, that escaped, monetary relations. Another evolution, if you want, it's in terms of strategies. Strategies for struggle, strategies for changing the world, strategy for creating a society beyond capitalism. In the first part of the book, the main feminist strategy that is proposed is the one that I was fighting with other women for in the 70s, which was wages for housework, which was a demand and a perspective intended to subvert, the sexual division of labor, which is really based upon the unpaid work of women. And in the last part, the last articles that I've written, I also speak very much about the question of the commons, the creation of the commons, that already brings the struggle beyond the issue of monetary relation, and already looks at the ways in which, starting from the present, we can begin to construct a different type of society, again, outside of the logic of the market, outside of the logic of capitalism. Capitalism is by itself a reproductive crisis, because the conclusion that we came to, analyzing the role of reproductive work in capitalist accumulation, is that capitalism needs structurally to devalue reproduction, to devalue reproductive labor, and to devalue the subjects of reproductive work, which is primarily women, not exclusively, but primarily. So capitalism needs to devalue reproductive work because it needs to lower the cost of producing the workforce. Today, there is also another way in which capital reproduction is a terrain of crisis, which is that one of the responses of the capitalist class to the incredible cycle of struggles that climaxed in the 60s and 70s, beginning with the anti-colonial struggle, with anti-war student, blue-collar work struggle, etc., feminist struggle. One of the response has been to completely transform the world economy and, for example, to cut, whatever investment the state had made, in the reproduction of the workforce. I mean, all the cortes, all the cuts, of public services that we are witnessing everywhere in the world, not just in Spain or Greece, but everywhere. Actually, the United States has been one of the leading. Africa, with the structural adjustment program, one of the first elements of structural adjustment in Africa and Latin America was the cuts of public investment in services, health, education, transport, basic necessities. That has created an immense reproductive crisis. We now have women in particular, are at the center of an incredible crisis, which is lack of resources, an incredibly long work day and work week. We are back to the time of the Industrial Revolution, a life made only of work and anxiety, because everything has become precarious. We don't know if we are going to be able to reproduce ourselves tomorrow. We have no time for our family, no time for our friends. Children are suffering, and it's not an accident now that, for example, in countries like the United States, and it's beginning to happen in other parts of the world, children are given an immense amount of tranquilizer, antidepressant. According to US statistics, 1 out of 4 US children has a mental disorder. Of course, the way I interpret it, of course, is that the problem created by the lack of resources and attention to children is medicalized, right? You disinvest in the school, and then you give children, pills because they have attention deficit, right? And the children are dissatisfied, and then we give them antidepressant. I mean, there's basically an attempt to medicalize and sedate, sedate this incredible dissatisfaction. Women are the biggest consumers of antidepressant, because they have life are becoming out of our control, consumed by so much work. I say that reproductive work really has 2 elements, and we need to distinguish, even though in life they are not separate. But intellectually, theoretically, we need to distinguish them, because the activities by which we reproduce our own life, have been in a way distorted, captured, constrained. They have been shaped in ways that are determined, by the needs of the labor market. So that is very important, because then we begin to realize that many of the things that we do, and one of the reasons why domestic work has been so oppressive, it's not because reproducing people is oppressive in itself, or it's not because reproducing people is less creative than any type of jobs, but because it has been organized in a particular way that is not shaped by our desires. Is shaped by needs that are not our needs, that are the needs of the capitalist market. Actually, we have begun to theorize in the women's movement that in struggling against certain aspects of housework and domestic work, we are actually liberating not only ourselves, but we're also liberating other people around us. For instance, women's struggle against unpaid labor is a struggle that men should have supported, that frees women, but men as well, from our economic dependence on them. That economic dependence has been also a discipline of men, has been a cause of inequality and power, unequal power relation, but has also been, so men have been able through the wage to command women's work and services, but that dependence has also meant their dependence of capital. Every time there is a strike and you have a woman that is dependent on you and children at home, you have to think twice whether you can join the strike or not. So I think that the disaggregating, redefining what housework is, seeing how housework is not a leftover of a pre-capitalist society, but how it has been constructed, by capitalism, and what mechanism it contains, that divide the working class, and that in a way allows capitalist class to delegate its power, to hide exploitation, to naturalize exploitation, to make it appear something natural, something that belongs to the personality, identity of women. It's been very, very important and liberatory, and I think has meant a step forward in the process of creating an anti-capitalist, non-capitalist world. First of all, the question of the common has been raised, has come to the center of radical organizing, not accidentally, starting in the 90s, because in the 90s we began to see that the last remaining commons were being lost, with this major drive led by the World Bank, towards the privatization of land, towards the privatization, increasing commercialization of land, forests, seas, and then every aspect of our life, right, has been, and this idea of the market as the hegemonic element of social relation. That somehow the market is the ultimate source of reproduction and commercialization of knowledge. For instance, now education that at one point was somehow guaranteed, you have to pay for, and so that in a way the idea of the commons represented a revolt against this process of privatization. It also represents the need that more and more communities are feeling across the world, right, to create immediately, in the present, alternative forms to the wage relation. Alternative, because there's no jobs, because there's no health care, because all the means of subsistence that people have come to rely upon in their life and with their struggle are being taken away. And so in a way, the idea of the common, whether it is reappropriating some land and creating some huertos, some gardens, and some new source of food, or whether to create spaces where knowledge can be produced and distributed outside of money relation. All of these are survival needs. So the desire for the commons, it's certainly motivated to a great extent by a very real need. So the commons represent also a way of reconstructing a certain community, communal relations, social fabric, without which we cannot really make a struggle with the state. We cannot make a struggle to begin to reorganize our life and to begin to, reclaim resources. I'm very interested in that aspect that concerns the reorganization of reproductive work. In other societies, reproductive work was done collectively in a context of extended families and communities. But in capitalism, you have the separation of the many single, separate houses where women work often all day alone and with multiple tasks, so that again, their life is totally consumed by this work. And I think we need to rethink as we are confronting the crisis and as we are creating new forms of existence, more cooperative, we also have to keep in mind the restructuring, reorganization of reproductive work in a way that is more cooperative, which means we have to find new ways of organizing the care for the children, the care for those who are not self-sufficient, the way domestic work is done. We have to rethink the house, the organization of the house, the relationship of the house to the neighborhood. All of this has to be rethought in a way that, again, creates community.